Seabrook, Texas, 1983. 20-year-old Susan Eads out with friends after a long day at work.
There was one man there that kept asking her either to dance or asking her something, and she kept refusing.
He left around the same time Susan left. I believe that he probably attacked Susan in the parking lot of Jason's Club.
Susan Eads never makes it home that night.
Her body was found near the yacht basins there in Seabrook on Nassau Road 1. She put up a fight that it was a struggle between her and the suspect in this case.
Years pass, but Susan's killer is never caught.
Nobody knew the suspect. People became more and more scared. Did they have a killer running loose here that was going to do this again?
All logical investigative leads had been exhausted, and this was very much a true whodunit.
Eventually, incredible advances in forensic science emerged for investigators.
We were kind of at a standstill, and we decided to look into genealogy, to construct a family tree, to find who this person was.
This is the story of how incredible forensic science and advancements, along with determined police work, combined to solve a 37-year-old murder. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Bloodline Detectives. Seabrook, Texas, 1983, a cozy town nestled in Galveston Bay, just 30 minutes south of Houston.
Traditionally, they call it a sleepy little fishing village, but it's just the easiest thing to say. It's a community. It's one of the nicest, friendliest communities that's on the water, so it has a little bit of everything.
But the seaside town is not immune to danger.
We get the same crime as major cities, we just don't get the volume. But we get, bad guys travel. And so we get a little bit of everything.
Susan Eads, a vibrant, beautiful young woman living and working in the area.
Susan was a young 20-year-old girl who lived with her family in Seabrook. They had moved just a few years before to Seabrook, and Susan was, a great girl. Everybody seemed to like her.
Susie was a little bitty thing, but big as a lion. She was ferocious. I was the oldest brother, and we didn't have a dad, so I tried to cover the emergencies. Like, the times we had fun as a family was probably going to the pool at my uncle's house. He had almost an Olympic-sized swimming pool at Hobby Airport. And so those are some really great times that didn't have to worry about fixing something or solving something. That's what I remember the most. I mean, best interactions I remember, other than maybe Christmas times and things like that.
Susan is diagnosed with scoliosis, and that impacts her life as she's growing up.
It was a pretty severe S-shaped curve in her back, and you see a noticeable height difference in her hips and the way she would stand. I didn't realize how self-conscious she was about it at the time. I think it was pretty scary that the only medical solution was a steel rod in your back, but that was a very risky operation and expensive operation. So we were trying chiropractors. I had another uncle that was helping with that, but Susie was trying to save money to correct it as much as possible because it bothered her so much.
August 30, 1983, Susan Eads has a long work day ahead. After, she's looking forward to meeting up with friends.
Susan went to work that day. She had several jobs. One of them was at a place called the Prickly Pear Bar, where she was a waitress and sometimes DJ'd. She also, after her shift at the Prickly Pear, she went to Charlie's, her second job, where she worked till about 12:30 that night. Then her and some of the other employees from Charlie's went to a place called Jason's Club, where they were just going to go hang out with each other after work.
From what everyone said, that there was one man there that kept asking her either to dance or asking her something, and she kept refusing. But she left alone. When she left, most of the ones that saw her leave said she left alone. But a few minutes afterwards, a person was seen leaving behind her.
Susan never makes it home that night.
Susan was last seen, in the very late night hours of August the 30th into the early morning hours of the 31st, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning or so that she was last seen.
There was no cell phones back then. That's number one. So if she had a boyfriend, the only boyfriend I've ever really known her to have, Bobby, and sometimes maybe she wouldn't come home, maybe stay at Bobby's. And so I don't think that was extremely unusual, so that it would alert my mother too much.
The next day, a terrible discovery.
A call was made to the Seabrook Police Department by a group of younger teenagers. Thought they saw what they believed at first was a mannequin, and they got out of their vehicle, went and checked, and saw that it was a body, a human body.
The horrified teens immediately called police.
They were dispatched to a vacant lot near a ditch right off of Nassau Road 1 at the corner of Elam Street in Seabrook. There's a boat sales building right next to this lot. They found a car parked near that building, found a woman's shoe in the car, and a short distance away in the field, they found the body of a young woman, small in stature, with no clothes on, laying face down in the middle of the field.
Detectives would have been called to the scene, and they would come out and do the best they could do with what they have, and that would be photograph. That would be obviously collect the body and anything they found around it.
They found several of her clothing items laying near her and saw that there was some sort of ligature around her neck with a stick intertwined in the ligature.
Detectives focus on a vehicle parked near the body.
They would process the car, trying to even determine in those days who this car belonged to.
We ran the license plate on the vehicle, and it did come back to Susan's mother. So we're pretty sure that we were probably dealing with one of the Eads family. The lieutenant went with me, and on the way he kept telling me how we should do this. And there's no way that you can plan in your mind that you're going to do this. You just have to pretty well go with what happens. Once we got there, Susan's mother answered the door, Shirley, and she identified herself, and we asked, did she have a daughter named Susan, which was traumatic to me because you can't hardly speak at that time. You're overwhelmed yourself. And she said yes, and she invited us in. We went in, and we had to tell her that her daughter was dead. She instantly started saying, are you sure? Is that my daughter? It can't be my daughter, that sort of thing. Denial set in, and we assured her that we were fairly certain that it was Susan, and she just crumpled and cried.
My phone rang, and it was my mother, and she was obviously upset and crying, and told me that the police wanted to talk to me. I don't know which policeman, it was a man, not a woman, got on the line and told me that Susie had been strangled. And I didn't know how to take that. What do you mean she's been strangled? Are you telling me she's been killed? He said, yes. And so immediately me and my wife Karen, we packed up and drove over to my mother's house. Of course, when I got there, it was chaos. My mother always sat in her rocking chair, and everybody was crying. I don't know how many policemen that was there, but it was a bunch.
All we could do is hug her and tell her that we were going to do the best we could do to find who did that.
The body of a beautiful young woman is found. A family's life is changed forever, and a killer is on the loose. That's next on Bloodline Detectives. August 31, 1983, the cozy Gulf town of Seabrook, Texas, is now a place of fear. A group of teens discover a naked body, the body of a 20-year-old waitress, Susan Eads, left dumped in a vacant lot, her car parked nearby. A murder investigation commences.
Police collected all the evidence. They also collected evidence from the car. They found multiple clothing items. This was a piece of the bodysuit they found on Susan's body. The suspect used this to tie around her neck and used a stick to tighten it, and this was found around her neck when she was discovered by police. Susan was a very small young lady. She weighed under 100 pounds according to her brother and sister. This was her dress she wore at the bar she worked at, and she was wearing this the night that they found her body. It was found located in her car. These were pantyhose found near Susan's body. This bra was found in the back of her car. These pantyhose were also found in the back seat of her car. We found 2 shoes from Susan. One was found in the back seat of her car. This shoe was found about 25 feet away from the car, between where they found Susan's body and where her car was parked.
Susan Eads' body brought in for autopsy.
It's where the delicate work would occur, not only to determine how Susan died, what caused her death, but also the processing of her body. You are processing that body the same way you would a room that you come into. You're processing it for fingerprints. You're processing it for damage. You're processing it for the what, why, and how.
Her autopsy told us that she had been dead for 12 hours, that she had been sexually assaulted, and we assumed that she was sexually assaulted, but it told us that she was. And she also had bruises, abrasions, on different parts of her body that we didn't see because the body was laying face down, and that she endured quite a bit.
They did determine that Susan had died of asphyxia as a result of the garrote that was used on her, but she also had extensive injuries from bruises, defensive wounds, offensive wounds. You could tell that she put up a fight, or the doctors were able to tell us that she put up a fight, that it was a struggle between her and the suspect in this case.
Shortly after the murder, Susan's mother begins getting disturbing phone calls. They're from a man who says his name is Bill.
You said you knew Susan. Well, I still can't believe that I never knew of you.
Some people have secrets,
Well, she wasn't one of them, I'm here to tell you.
She just didn't think a whole lot about it, but they progressively got worse. They would talk to her and tell them they had pictures of Susan. Did she want to see them? They'd let her see them if she'd meet him somewhere.
You have some pictures of her, you told me. I'd like to see them.
just you, I ain't gonna show them to
Would you want me to meet you somewhere? Do you want to come to the house?
my place or a motel or something like that.
Miss Eads was a tough lady. She was described to me as, truly Susan's mom. She was that person that, especially for children, she'd fight 10 bulldogs at the same time. You know, she would do anything to protect those kids. So she winds up, you know, playing along with this guy, this person that's calling and saying, you know, terrible things to her, and saying that he has certain items that he wants to show her, or he wants to give her, or whatever. We also have to keep in mind that her daughter had been murdered by someone we knew to be a male at this point. And is this the real suspect that did it? Why does he want to meet her? Why does he want to meet her alone? What is that about? My first thoughts are he's trying to kill her too. He's trying to hurt or assault her also. But she plays along. There's some technology that was put in place to record the phone calls when they came in. There was actually a script that was developed with her to be able to converse with this person that was calling to try to get more information. And Miss Eads played along with that.
Detectives cannot identify the mysterious caller harassing Susan's mother.
And it was just so heartbreaking because we could never get anything on this guy. And he was gross. I mean, he was gross to call this mother of this victim and say the things that he did. You know, that was just the way. And the calls went on for a long time. I think the last call that we had, that we logged, was in like 1985. And that was 2 years after, you know, Susan's death.
Remember, in the 1980s, detectives do not have the investigative tools they've got today. Forensic science is in its infancy, and surveillance cameras simply are not widely in use. Police are forced to rely on old-school police methods to try and catch a vicious killer.
In 1983, they didn't have the technology we have nowadays. The tools they had at their disposal were fingerprints, blood typing. There weren't surveillance videos, so they would have to go canvass neighborhoods, talk to employees at businesses. In 1983, at the beginning of the investigation, police went and interviewed all of Susan's co-workers that worked with her that night at her 2 jobs at Charlie's and Prickly Pear. They went, interviewed employees at Jason's Club, which was the last place Susan was seen that night, and any friends she was with who had seen her at Jason's Club. After talking to witnesses and Susan's friends at Jason's Club, police learned that a man with a beard and a cowboy hat had asked Susan to dance several times that night. Susan turned him down, did not want to dance with him, and he seemed to be fairly annoyed with Susan. Police created the sketch and put out the sketch to the community and received several calls with different suspects. One of the calls they received was for a man named Travis Scoggins.
Travis Scoggins, he was described as being in the vicinity where Susan was when she was killed. He was described as being at the bar that she worked, being at Jason's, and being in the area.
He had a beard, wore a cowboy hat a lot, and he was also charged with the sexual assault of a female in a neighboring county. He had strangled his victim in that case.
Travis Scoggins did confess to the crime, wrote a statement, the whole 9 yards. He did every bit of that.
He wanted to go around and show us where the murder had taken place and how it had taken place. They did the blood type from the FEMA that they got. He was not the blood type. That's eventually why it was dropped.
I don't know why he made the confession. I don't know what he thought he would get out of it. Obviously, there was something there that he thought was for him, but it was a long time ago, and Travis died in prison eventually.
After police ruled out Travis Scoggins, the case went cold.
Believe it or not, a murder confession turns out to be a fake. That leaves a murder investigation on its head at a complete dead end. 34 long years go by until an infamous serial killer emerges as a possible link. That's next on Bloodline Detectives. August 30, 1983, Seabrook, Texas, 20-year-old Susan Eads out with friends. Witnesses report seeing her speaking with a man who is angered when Susan refuses to dance with him. The next day, her brutalized body discovered in a ditch. After a false confession, the case goes cold for decades. Fast forward 34 years, now 2017. Detectives believe an infamous serial killer from the 1980s may be behind Susan's brutal murder.
Anthony Allen Shore is a Texas convict from the Houston area who worked in the telephone industry. Blue-collar guy. He was convicted of numerous sexual assaults and homicides and was eventually sentenced to death and sent to Texas death row in Huntsville. So Anthony Allen Shore's mode of operation was that he abducted young women, very small women, and would sexually assault them, sexually abuse them, and then strangled them.
At the time, he had killed 3 women that police knew about. He was called the tourniquet killer because he always wrapped something around their throat, similar to the way Susan was killed.
Investigators are convinced serial killer Anthony Shore is the new prime suspect, and now they need evidence to prove it.
I would describe DNA as a biological blueprint. It helps determine who we are and what we look like. About 99% of it is going to be the same from each person, which is why our noses are where they are, our ears and our eyes are where they are. And that's something that we can use in the forensic field to help identify people who've left DNA behind at crime scenes.
The evidence from 1983 is re-examined. 34 years later, detectives have new and amazing forensic science as a weapon. First, they need a DNA sample from the crime scene, a sample they hope will match their suspect.
On December 11th, 2017, I examined the bodysuit, and there is where I identified a possible blood stain and a semen stain on the crotch of the bodysuit.
In order to identify sperm cells, we have to look at them under a microscope. We're going to take a small cutting of that item. We're going to put it in some water for a little bit, spin down that cellular debris, dry it on a microscope slide. We have specific staining that we use that helps us to visualize those sperm cells under the microscope. So on the bodysuit, Amanda Domer was able to isolate and find one sperm cell on that bodysuit, which indicated to us we have the potential at this point to get a male profile from that item of evidence. So that was pretty exciting for us.
It was very exciting, and at that point, we didn't know whose that was, or if we were going to be able to get a DNA profile because it was just one sperm cell. Typically, we need a couple dozen in order to obtain a DNA profile with the technology that we use. So I was hopeful, but I did not want to hold my breath just yet until we got the DNA results later on.
Investigators are fighting the clock. Anthony Shore is scheduled to be executed. Before that happens, detectives must compare the DNA sample from Susan Eads' brutalized body to Anthony Shore's DNA to determine, will there be a DNA match?
We've got a guy that potentially committed a crime, committed a horrendous crime, who's going to be executed. And getting an execution stopped takes the act of a governor at minimum. They just don't stop those things. It is a really big deal. It is a legal process that is way above a field ranger who's doing a homicide investigation. So time was of the essence.
There was a request to rush this case because we spoke with the Rangers and Seabrook PD in November of 2017, and Anthony Shore was scheduled to be executed in January of 2018. So we wanted to see if we could make any comparisons to Anthony Shore before his execution date.
I get his DNA and I drive it straight to the crime lab, getting there, 8:30 or 9 o'clock is my recollection, turning that over to my partner, Tanya Dean, at the crime lab. I think she stayed up processing that all night long, which never happens. I'll never forget meeting with Tanya, her walking out of the crime lab, looking very dejected, dragging her feet and saying, not him, he's not our guy, when we were just absolutely convinced. Where we went after that was Anthony saying, well, you know, I basically told y'all that it wasn't me, but if you really want proof, and this part is sickening to even say to this day, but Anthony said, if you really want proof, look at my victims. Look at what my victims looked like. I like children. I like the way little girls look. Susan was, though a petite gal, she doesn't look like what I like. I'm not turned on by somebody like that. And again, I say that to say that's a very sick thing for me to even have to repeat. After he said that and the DNA, we knew he wasn't our guy. I saw the reason that the death penalty exists in Anthony Allen Shore's eyes, up to and including walking Anthony Shore from his cell to the death chamber to be strapped down and executed. Never once, never one sense of remorse, never one sense of sadness, not a sense of relief.
Anthony Shore, the so-called tourniquet killer, is officially ruled out as a suspect in Susan Eads' murder. The detectives try a new approach. They upload the DNA from the murder scene into the CODIS database.
CODIS is the Combined Offender DNA Index system. It's used to store all DNA profiles from everyone that goes to prison, convicted felons. So anybody who has ever committed a crime similar to this and been caught, their DNA would be in this system. Once we had our profile, we ran it through CODIS, and there was no match. We were kind of at a standstill.
We were extremely disappointed with not being able to identify who this DNA belonged to.
We did a lot of things in this case to make sure we had crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's with CODIS, with everything we had, to no avail.
Another prime suspect ruled out by that CODIS search, and investigators now facing another dead end. When we come back, will new forensic science finally close the murder of Susan Eads? In 2018, Texas Rangers, Seabrook Police, and the FBI reinvestigating the 1983 rape and murder of 20-year-old Susan Eads. For 35 years, all the promising leads are bust. But now, detectives try new, groundbreaking forensic science.
Forensic genetic genealogy became our next step. Who do we reach out to? How do we do that? What is forensic genetic genealogy?
Forensic genetic genealogy is a method that has been around for a very long time. Originally called genetic genealogy, it was used by hobbyists, by individuals who are researching their family trees. And what it does is it combines direct-to-consumer DNA testing with more traditional genealogy tools such as public records, census records, marriage licenses, obituaries, and you take the DNA test, and when you upload it to the database, you have what we call genetic relatives. There are individuals in the database who are matches, who are somehow related to you. The database, through its algorithm, will assign a predicted relationship between individuals who are related to each other. It could be a first cousin, it could be second cousin, it could be aunt, uncle, different relationships. But by knowing that you match, you are related to an individual in the database, you can take their information and you can start searching public records and see if you can find them and merge the two pieces of data together to continue to build family trees.
Using GEDmatch, using that law enforcement database from folks who have voluntarily given their DNA to build a family tree. There are now databases that people enter because they want to help solve crimes. They literally, people, including myself, put themselves in those databases to build other databases stronger that law enforcement can use to help solve these violent crimes. So we did that in this case. 3, we didn't really understand how it worked or how it was going to work for us, or even if it was going to be legally accepted as a tool. Forensic genetic genealogy is a tip that says, here's a place to start. Let's start here.
At the very end of 2018, but primarily into 2019, was when we really started having activity with the genetics part of the case.
We started building that family tree using GEDmatch, using the FBI, using a lot of different people at the time to help us build towards who our suspect actually was.
We took samples from approximately 8 or 9 different people to try to narrow down the family tree. I can tell you though, when the genealogist would identify potential people for us to collect from, in some instances, in one particular instance, I think it was the very first lead that Brandon and I went on together, the individual let us know that they had been born out of wedlock. So it was not going to fit what we needed. They were happy to give us a profile, but we knew at that point, okay, that happens. Sometimes when the genealogists are looking at existing family trees to try to see if someone's a suitable sample, it won't indicate an adoption. It won't indicate born out of wedlock or something like that. So it can make it challenging. Sometimes we go down sort of rabbit holes on some of these leads to get to finally where we need to be. But in this case, it got narrowed down pretty quickly because of the work of the genealogist.
After months of tedious research, DNA genealogists finally have a lead.
In 2020, the genealogy company contacted the Rangers, who contacted us to let us know that they had a potential suspect named.
Arthur Raymond Davis. Name had never popped up anywhere, never heard of this guy. Will pouring through the case files over and over and over again, had never heard of this guy, nothing. He was absolutely a person that was not on our radar, that had been identified through forensic genetic genealogy. It's a person to date that I haven't found anyone in Seabrook, Texas that knew who he was.
When I first saw a picture of Arthur Davis and compared it to the sketch that was done in the 80s, it was obvious that it was a very, very close match.
It was unreal. It was totally unreal at the closeness of it. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, this can't be. And I looked at it and I thought, oh no, come on. Somebody just took a sketch of this and then put it, but it was for real. I mean, Davis was so much like that composite.
Bloodline detectives believe they finally know who murdered Susan Eads 37 years ago. That's until they run up against another roadblock. Next. Seabrook, Texas, 2020, 37 years after the brutal rape and murder of 20-year-old Susan Eads. But now, detectives believe they've solved the case until a bombshell. Frustrating news.
We've all, homicide detectives, have cases that our suspect dies at some point in time. However, for cold cases, and one going back this far, being unusual to even be able to get a solve with a team on it, we discovered that Arthur Raymond Davis had been killed in a car wreck driving a stolen Corvette. About December time frame, I believe he was in the wreck, stayed in the hospital for quite some time, and eventually did pass away in January of 1984. And again, he was in a stolen car, and I'm about 60% convinced that Arthur Davis committed suicide. Based on the accident investigation, based on the small amount, very small information that we have, there was nothing about that wreck that was normal. I believe that Arthur Davis killed himself via a car wreck. So the detectives that were working the case in the day, number one, would have had no reason to look for this guy. And number two, he was dead while they were still working the case. So even more difficult a case to try and solve, an unknown person who was dead that you're trying to find.
Investigators are determined to confirm Arthur Davis raped and murdered Susan Eads in 1983.
Agent Gregory and the FBI were able to reach out to contacts and actually locate a son of Arthur Raymond Davis, who was very cooperative and submitted a sample of his DNA. Within a day or two, we had that sample delivered to Tanya Dean at our lab.
YSTR testing or paternal testing is going to look at the Y chromosome that is passed down during the paternal lineage. So the son, the father, the grandfather are all going to have the same YSTR profile, pending any mutations or any other biological processes that may interrupt that. So it's not as identifying as the autosomal STR analysis that we typically perform, because it only points to a lineage, but it can be used for exclusionary purposes. And for this case, it at least gave the investigators an idea that this was the paternal lineage that they needed to look at. They just needed to look at the external factors, such as the location and the timing of the events, to see who may have been in the area and who could have been a suspect in this case.
We were able to confirm that the YSTR profile from the son was consistent with the YSTR profile from our crime scene evidence.
37 years after Susan's murder, investigators can finally ID her killer.
April 24th of 2020 is the day that we had a solve in this case. And that is the day that we had the confirmation, based on all the genealogy work that had been done, based on the background work, based on everything that the FBI, Tanya Dean, the DPS crime lab put together. Confirmation was received on that date that Arthur Raymond Davis would have been the person that would have left that DNA on Susan's clothing and the DNA that was found on the ligature garrote that was used to kill her.
Exhumation of Arthur Ray Davis was a thought, and it was discussed. DPS, the Ranger, Seabrook PD, the District Attorney's Office all met. And at that point, an extensive amount of research had been done on Arthur Davis, his whereabouts, where he had lived, his life. And after everybody talked everything through, the DNA results, the genealogy results, the criminal history, all of those things, everybody was quite certain and confident that Arthur Davis was the perpetrator in this crime, and an exhumation was probably going to cause more harm than good, and they felt confident closing the case at that point. The feeling in the lab was that everybody was just super excited. Again, these cases tend to not be successful, and we tend to not get answers the majority of the time. So on the occasion that we are successful with these cold cases, again, it just kind of aligns us, it reminds us why we're here, reminds us what we're doing, and makes us feel really good about the job that we do every day.
The only reason we were able to solve this case, and I believe this case never would have been solved without forensic genetic genealogy.
There's never closure when you lose a loved one like that. There's not. There's answers. We hope to provide an explanation about why this may have happened. Arthur Davis was actually in the Coast Guard, served in Vietnam in a patrol-type boat, patrolling the shores of Vietnam.
Vietnam did a lot of strange things to a lot of veterans. And I don't know what he went through. I know his families broke up. He had a broken family. He had kids of his own. I can't imagine that he would set out to go kill a girl, but then you never know.
Arthur Davis probably left the bar, sat outside the bar waiting on Susan to leave, followed Susan, somehow got her to pull over, flashed his lights, did something, got her to pull over, assaulted, sexually assaulted, and then killed her.
They're never going to get over Susan's death and the way she died or was murdered, but they have some closure on who did it.
Susan was indeed a person who she was that sister you would want. Dennis, Her brother described her to me as a wildcat, as a tomcat, as a bulldog, as just this person that loved life, that loved people. Susan Eads was just truly a good person.
You can dwell on it, it can eat you up, or you can try to pick up the pieces and do the best with the cards you're dealt. And I think that's what I tried to do.
By the time she's just 20, Susan Eads has already faced the incredible challenge of a potentially crippling disease. But still, her incredible outlook on life inspires her family and her friends. It's all the more tragic that a senseless act of violence ends Susan's life so early on, much too soon. I'm Nancy Grace, and I want to thank you for joining us here on Bloodline Detectives.